I'm Jeff Nyquist, and this is another edition of Friends and Enemies with my co-host Alex Benesch in Germany. Uh, we're going to talk about some things having to do with the tax-exempt foundations. I think you're going to talk about the Ford Foundation, right, Alex? And um,
That's
and of
right,
course,
yeah.
I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the insights of Matthias Desmet in his Psychology of Totalitarianism, and of course the works of Gustav Le Bon, who wrote *The Crowd*, *The Psychology of Revolutions*, and *The Psychology of Socialism*, um, and how it relates to ongoing events. I'm still working on my essay, part 5 of the crisis that we're in right now. As it's been unfolding, it's made it difficult for me to write about it because I have a grip on it, but I want to be up to date on everything and connect the dots. And of course, we've had since the advent of since December, when I sort of started writing the series, we have had the Epstein files controversy, where basically they said we're going to be transparent, and they kept thousands of pages of the Epstein files back. We had the war in Iran erupt, and of course, as a further diversion, as if the war in Iran was not a diversion from the Epstein files, which I think people. I heard Anthony Scaramucci, who'd been Trump's chief of staff in his first term for 11 days, say that if you don't think that Trump did the war in Iran as a diversion from the Epstein files, then you don't understand what's going on with Trump. But the UAP file drop, the UFO UAP
Oh, yeah.
file, I just saw one of the researchers, one of the UFO researchers, Mr. Dolan, he's read through what they've released so far, and it's like a giant nothing burger of a compilation that most of them, these documents, have been released by Freedom of Information Act. They're just the usual blue book type stuff. Control, some of the early FBI reports about UFOs saying, oh, this isn't we took these reports, but this belongs to the Army Air Force. This is before the Air Force was created, and things of this nature. So these UAP people, UFO researchers, ufologists, whatever you want to call them, are disappointed, and many of the fanboys of UFOs are upset, as you can imagine. And there's been a meeting of pastors in the United States with some private group. What is connection with the government? I don't know. Telling these pastors that to get their congregations ready, right? And some of them made it sound like this was coming from the White House or the government. Apparently not. And of course, I've heard about these flying circuses that have gone around for years. I had a friend who was a scientist who was in one. Never knew what to make out of this. Some of the sponsorship was from our intelligence community, which was interesting, especially if you read the book The Mirage Men, about how the government is, through some of its agents, supporting behind the scenes, denying UFOs are real, but yet supporting these UFO narratives. It's very strange, very hard to understand what's going on there. But all of these things are part of the Trump dance that he is doing with the federal government, and it creates a huge wave on the internet of attention diversion, from these Epstein files, and so that now the Epstein files are sort of being buried. But then we go on, these elite tax-exempt foundations financing different things. Why don't you tell us, Alex, why the Ford Foundation is important and what you have discovered about it?
Well, anytime you want to change society, either if you want to change society either for better or for worse, if you want to have this effect on many people, you need expertise and you need money. And we've seen that with the with the Hollywood phenomenon about alien movies and future civilizations and all that sorts of thing, with these messages embedded. I mean, a lot of the science fiction genre has been very, very left wing. The original Star Wars movie George Lucas, very left-wing guy. His inspiration was communist uprisings. Those are the rebels, right? And they're fighting this empire, which seems like a hybrid of the British Empire and the German Nazi Empire. And also the other messages that sometimes get lost in or are not so conscious in people's minds. You know, when we think of future civilizations, alien contact, other civilizations, when this is merged with the idea of a socialist society and a socialist economy, you know, this was kind of in the background of the Star Wars movies, because there's never any clear debate on, well, if you win against the Empire, if we are successful with our rebellion against the Empire, how do we live? How do we decide who does what kind of job? How does the space economy work like? But the undertone was clearly we're gonna have it nice and many different intergalactic races, and everything's gonna be fine. You know, we're gonna have these elders like the Jedi Council and some other entities like that. They're gonna make this new society. First Alien movie by Ridley Scott. This was in multiple ways anti-corporate. You know, it's just like this space exploration corporation. They're mining stuff in our galaxy, and they ship the resources back to Earth. This spaceship carrying a refinery. The spaceship is on its way home to Earth. Stops about halfway. Crew gets woken up, and the computer says there's a radio signal, possible intelligent life. We are contractually obligated to investigate. And there's and it's not just the company has this conspiracy going on, and it's like this military corporate conspiracy going on, but it's also in the movie Alien. I think it was from 1979. There's like this, you see this dynamic between these characters in the movie, which is like the typical workplace drama. Is you got these mechanics, they feel they're underpaid, they don't like everybody else doesn't like the mechanics, everybody's frustrated, everybody hates working, everybody hates this capitalism, they hate what they're doing, but they're forced to do that. And the company that they work for, or that they're contracted with, they decide what's going to happen. And it's like this passive aggressiveness in between these characters, because it's capitalism in space. And you got Star Trek, very socialist. You know, no more money earning, no more capitalism. It's just this federation of whatever, and they're deciding how everything goes. So this whole UFO space thing is tied to political propaganda, and Hollywood pushed this stuff. I mean, it's crazy how some people say, well, Hollywood is evil, but we like the alien stuff. Or we like the alien stuff, and Hollywood is doing the alien stuff. And they're just, pushing this narrative, and everybody wants to see something, and everybody expects something. So it takes money, and it takes expertise to change people's opinions, right? And this can be done through Hollywood. This can be done through any sort of activism. And as I said, some dangerous networks, they have expertise and money. Then you get some influencers, especially on the right nowadays. Successful influencers, they have practically zero. They have zero knowledge. They don't have expertise, but they get money from somewhere. Somebody pays them. Could be some crazy billionaires from all over the world. Could be Qatar. Could be anything. So they have money, but no expertise. And then you get hordes and hordes of activists, all kinds, all types, and these everyday normal people activists. They have no expertise and no money. This is where we're at. And so it's like, you either have this hope for these aliens that are going to bring us space socialism, or an advanced type of civilized way of
space socialism, like in Star Trek.
Yeah, so they're going to bring us that. So the aliens are going to bring us that, or organizations, humans are going to bring us that socialist society, and like Soviet futurism when they had these graphics drawn up in the Soviet Union, and this futurism, we're going to have like spaceships and rockets, and even the Soviets, they made like this big deal out of it when they sent probes to Venus or something. I mean, I'm not totally into this space science, but I think the Soviets had some very expensive space exploration operations that they funded, and it's like, yeah, either the aliens are going to bring us that, or these socialist humans are going to bring us to salvation and bring us into the future. We got this thing on the sort of on the right with Elon Musk now, where he said, oh, by the way, poverty is going to go away. Have you seen that? When Elon said, my robots, the Grok AI, this is going to create so much wealth that most people won't even have to work that much anymore, and we're going to have things because the robots are doing the work for us. So now it's Elon Musk kind of coming from
But who pays for all the energy that runs the robots?
I don't know.
When the Strait of Hormuz is closed and there's shortages of, the price of oil and the price of electricity, everything's going up.
Yeah, and it's like unfortunately, the left is kind of bitching. The left is kind of bitching about it, that it's now this sort of capitalist technocrat Elon Musk, who's on paper who's worth hundreds of billions now, and he's building space rockets. He says we're going to build a station on Mars, we're going to colonize Mars, and we're going to have all this space colonization, and we're going to mine resources on other planets. So we're going to send machines up there, and they're going to mine things, and then we can build things because we have the energy. So it's it's like lots of promises, but not much in terms of delivery. But hope, or let's say an exaggerated version of hope from the left, they modeled their cult after religions. It's like there's a paradise that we're working towards. There's a paradise, and we're gonna go there, and we're gonna squash whatever is in our way. And socialists, they need people to be miserable, so they cling to this unrealistic hope. And when we try to understand the left in America, it's the left. The left in America is very professional. This is like a whole slew of organizations that make new organizations that fund new organizations. So there's even too many names for people to remember. But in some, they have a significant influence on the population. They have expertise. The people who run it, they have expertise and they have money. And how do we compete with that? Because when I look at right-wing activism, sometimes it's organized, sometimes there's like serious money behind it and serious brains behind it, but oftentimes it's like chaotic. It's like something out of a schoolyard. People are just loudmouths and they gain traction. Then there's other people that are just like that, but they differ somewhat. And now everybody's fighting. Everybody's fighting on Twitter. Dan Bilzerian is feuding with Nick Fuentes, and Nick Fuentes is feuding with other guys, and they're feuding with Nick Fuentes, and everybody calls everybody a Fed, and everybody calls everybody, a secret asset of the Great Conspiracy. Most people are incapable of working together, right? But we are facing this highly organized machine. And the Ford Foundation has been really, really powerful in that. So initially, this was seen as, or guessed at as, some sort of a tax avoidance scheme. Oh, we're just doing some philanthropy. The Ford Motor Company, with the guy running it, who was mass printing the fake protocols of Zion, who was printing up this international Jew essay compilation, and financing that extreme right-wing nonsense. At the same time, Ford, the Ford Motor Company, they had these deals with the Soviet Union, with the Soviets to build factories over there. So they had this foundation. People thought, it's for tax avoidance reason, and then it became this monstrosity. And at some point, it was said that this is not the Ford family anymore. It's still called Ford Foundation, but it's its own thing. So billions and billions of dollars, and the stuff that they pay for. Roughly 75% of its spending is now general support funding for organizations, allowing activist groups to direct money toward causes like racial and gender inequality, environmental justice, and anti-police ideologies. So there's even money for groups like Empower Change to boost Muslim grassroots power. Initiatives opposing nuclear energy in favor of renewable energy sources. Diversity in media and art. $1 million. $1 million went to the Youth Engagement Fund. Strengthening civic participation by young people of color. So then there's the Women's March Network, or was the Women's March Network. $375,000 from Ford since 2022. Street demonstrations, the whole bit. We are still the resistance was the slogan for its national conference in 2023. Sunrise Movement Education Fund, $250,000 from Ford in June of 2022. These and other examples totaling almost $45.2 million in grants since 2022. Center for Popular Democracy, $10.6 million since 2022. And this is all the direct action stuff, going on the streets and blah, blah, blah. Power Switch Action, formerly known as the Partnership for Working Families, seeks a world where land is commonly owned, where the rules for how goods are produced, services delivered, and wealth produced are governed democratically. Yeah, as if people would get along with each other. $9 million. $9 million to Power Switch since 2022. Advocacy group Demos promotes reparations for slavery, cancellation of student loan debt, and a government guarantee of a good job to any individual who wants one. Sounds great, Jeff, right? You have a guarantee to a good job if you want one. $6.5 million. That's, right? That's solid funding right there. Policy.
A good job if you want one.
Yeah, it's just nobody's really getting a good job if they want one. They're just, but this gets millions of dollars, so people actually get this cult-like hope. I'm gonna get a good job if I want one, so I'm just gonna vote Democrat, and that's all I can think of. Because some people are.
This was the first thing I heard about politics when I was a kid. After John Kennedy was shot, I was 5 years old, and I was in the church basement. And people, the older guys, the men were talking about they had a TV on in the church basement. It was between Sunday school and church. And I remember they had a picture of Lyndon Johnson getting into an armored limousine or whatever. Kennedy was shot in an open car, so the president was not going in any kind of open car, and they were saying, he's totally corrupt. Yeah, those Democrats, they promise everybody a job. They promise people all these things, and he just got elected by promising goodies to people. That was, of course, the space program. The reason it was in Houston, right? Houston control, we have a problem.
Yeah.
That was because Johnson was president. The Johnson Center, and Houston control. I mean, it was the space program. That was jobs for Texans, right?
Really?
Because the Texan was president. Everybody knew this back then.
You get a space job if you want one.
This coworker of my dad came home. He was a member of it. He worked for ABC TV at the time. He was an editor in Chicago, and he came home one day, I remember, and he said this guy at work had said, I voted for Johnson. I know he was corrupt, but it was, it was good for unions and good for me personally. So I voted for him. So the voter's corrupted, not just the person running is corrupted. So that was sort of my first, that doesn't seem right,
Well,
as a
yeah.
5-year-old. Was like, okay, I get that.
Oh boy.
Everybody understands getting a piece of candy for voting for
don't take
somebody,
candy
right?
from
Even
strangers.
kids
Don't
understand.
get into a stranger's car. Oh, there's the ice cream man. It's free ice cream. Get into the van.
Well, a lot of the people that theorized Johnson was okay with Kennedy being assassinated because Johnson was in very, very grave danger of being impeached or removed from office, forced to resign like Spiro Agnew did under Nixon, because he was coming under investigation, and there was this huge scandal hanging over him just before Kennedy's assassination. So there was speculation that, of course, he was okay with. Of course, um, Kennedy did get shot in Dallas, right? But
Yeah.
but no, we know Lee Harvey Oswald did it. The people who call him a patsy, they just are not able to work with facts. But again, it is, if I'm the Soviet Union, if Lee Harvey Oswald is working for Cuba or the Soviet Union, do I want a president in the White House who's corrupt, who there's scandals, who I might have some blackmail information on?
Great
Yeah, sure
stuff.
I
Yeah.
do. Yeah. So when all these, Johnson later in the Johnson tapes that were released, in the late '90s, they released he had White House tapes just like Nixon, recorded everything in there, and there's phone calls where he was telling people, yeah, that's what the files show, that it was the Castro had a hand, the Cuban DGI had a hand in Kennedy's assassination, and of course, what they didn't want to reveal was that the Kennedy brothers, there had been assassination attempts on Castro, and Robert Kennedy was trying to arrange the assassination of Castro by hiring a Brazilian to shoot Castro with a rifle with a telescopic sight. And this Brazilian was, of course, a friend of the Castros, and he just turned around and told him. So that's where that video of Castro going to the Brazilian embassy and saying, hey, what was it, Colombian, come over here, to this Colombian AP reporter, and he said, the Kennedys want to kill me, and I want to tell everybody it's a two-way street. I mean, that's a video. You can go online and watch Castro saying it in Spanish right now. So, I mean, it's like these things are so obvious. Lee Harvey Oswald wanted to live in Cuba, right? He had met Cuban DGI people when he was in Russia.
Yeah,
Because
I mean,
where he
this is
was,
like, the guy wanted to be a big shot. He wanted to retire
yeah,
as a
he
superstar
did.
and
Yep,
give lectures and be forever
yep.
remembered as a big shot. And it's like, I mean, we know we did a whole episode on Oswald, and he needed very little in terms of expertise and in terms of funds, right? I mean, he had these
Mhm.
odd jobs, and for a while he was under
And
investigation, and
yeah,
but he didn't need crazy funds. He was
and he
able
had a
to
beautiful wife, basically a beautiful Russian wife, who some like Ion Pacepa, the Romanian intelligence defector, believed was a
plan. Yeah,
KGB
yeah.
agent.
But
Basically,
as
she
broke,
had an Uncle Sasha like
yeah.
female KGB agents.
But
She
as
claimed to be
broke
from
as
this
he
small
was,
town by
yeah, as broke
Archangel,
as
but she
Oswald
was had a
was,
Leningrad accent. Yeah.
as broke as Oswald was, still, to get this guy as a teenager into communism and the struggle and Marxism, Leninism,
He was into
assassination.
communism when he was in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, even as
Yeah.
a teenager,
They
even as
made
even
fun
as a
of
troubled
him.
teenager.
Yeah.
But to achieve that, to get a person that early and that thoroughly, that takes a lot. That took a lot of resources for socialism or from socialism and communism, Soviet Union. That takes a lot. So this is why they built these things. And each individual activist group or whatever, or local scene, communist scene, each and every single one of these may be overlooked or may not be seen as so dramatic, but the sheer mass of it, the sheer structure of it in total, that's what's really, really dangerous. And it's like we had a whole episode about this theme of space aliens and UFOs, and the aliens are gonna change everything. This is sort of how you can tie together all religions. You just claim that
Yeah.
all these big religions or older religions, all these older religions, all these big religions, they're all kind of the same because of the space aliens. They just had different interpretations, and it got lost in translations and blah blah
Or
blah.
they say the space aliens invented our religions, right?
Yeah. Or the aliens created us, and we just saw
Yes.
the people
Yeah.
saw different iterations and visions of these aliens, and they called them different gods and angels. But this is how you can tie them all together, and this is how you can give a new flair, a new image, a new push to it, even to socialism, because socialism is seen kind of as old and failed and lame and but if you add space aliens to it and advanced civilizations, that's a whole different ballgame. That's a whole new marketing. So it's like endless.
Well, there's also Steven Spielberg, is coming out with a disclosure movie.
Yeah,
I wonder what that's going to be about, right?
Yeah,
So he's been a major, doing with his Close Encounters movie decades ago. He's been a big person pushing this whole agenda through Hollywood.
Yeah, and recently I just caught it again on YouTube. I think I mentioned this before. This is like this old video, very old video. It seems like from the 80s or something, or maybe early 90s. This is James Cameron, famous director. A lot of sci-fi movies, Avatar and Terminator and Aliens and The Abyss. And he talks about the drug LSD and how he's responsibly using LSD, and he's not taking it too seriously. He's just, because he's smart, he's not just taking the experience at face value and whatever. But still, in his movies, that's kind of in there. When people saw The Abyss in theaters, with this underwater deep sea rig and this, what was it, a submarine with nukes and something with the Soviets in the Cold War, and then these American special forces, they tried to salvage the submarine or some plot like that. It's like a Cold War setting. But then there's these aliens, these underwater aliens. They landed here millions of years ago and whatever, but they're still here underwater. And then these, colorful aliens, so it looks like an LSD trip. These colorful aliens then communicate with the main protagonist at the end of the movie. I hope I'm not spoiling this dumb movie for anybody now.
I've never seen it.
No, it's like the main protagonist. He's like in this bubble in the end, and these aliens are showing him like footage of the bad stuff that humans are doing. Because of capitalism, and nationalism, and because I think he even asks the alien, "What's your problem with us?" or "What do you think of us?" or whatever, and then he gets this kind of diorama of human evil. So it's like, and
Which is so
Avatar,
funny because this is what the UFO religion kind of is about, is how bad humans are because we have it's like the John Lennon song turned into a UFO encounter, right? Imagine there's no countries and there's no God above.
yeah.
The song Imagine. It's like the aliens have this philosophy right out of a Beatles song. Is that weird?
Yeah, and it's like, and one of the biggest offenders right now is of course Joe Rogan, an MMA expert who's an expert in pretty much nothing else. Rogan keeps having these guests on. I think Bob Lazar and everybody who claims outrageous things, and we never see any real proof of anything. Having these guests on over and over and over again, giving them this big platform. And Rogan always been a huge fan of the 1960s, the counterculture, the Jimi Hendrix music and the drugs and the psychedelics and everything, and the rebellion against the system. And Rogan said, "I'm a socialist. I just look like a Republican, but I'm really a socialist." That's what he used to say before he kind of went on the Trump train. But this is like this thing that keeps going back towards leftist ideology. Wouldn't it be cool if we all took LSD and the aliens gave us technology, and the evil right-wing government cannot keep this alien technology for itself? We all get it, and we all benefit from it.
Is the Trump train a little socialist, maybe?
It's like, well, it's like this. You try to wrap your head around these things, old money families, these or some of these families like Ford, they spawn this Ford Foundation, and then it just becomes this backbone of the left. How does that happen? How does that happen? It's just it's bizarre. And there's some wealthy people that played with fire. They probably thought, and the British had done the same experiment, we're going to control the left. The Privy Council or the old money billionaire club, we're going to control the left because we can afford it. We're just going to buy the left sphere and we're going to run it. And it's going to work. But is it really? Because from a old money perspective, this is kind of an enticing thought. You control most people, they will not have much, but they will not riot, so everything goes along. And the old money billionaires, they stay billionaires, and the rabble, the regular people, they are just being handled and managed. So that's kind of like one reason why sometimes wealthy people may fund socialist policies. But this is playing with nuclear fire. This can go horrendously wrong. This can go horrendously wrong, because it's like there was money. Oh yeah, before I forget that. Now the Ford Foundation, the Ford Foundation, they had some people, and I get to that in a bit. They had some super experts on uprisings that were involved in the Vietnam War. They try to apply their knowledge about uprisings and communist uprisings, apply that to the U.S. domestically, and they had there's connections to people from Google. And I read this book maybe 20 years ago. I don't quite remember when it was. This book by Eric Schmidt, was the boss of Google, and his co-author was some kind of an expert on insurgencies and counter-insurgencies, right? So, and in this book, Schmidt says, technology is going to enable us to, help the regular people get along with what they have better. So they're never going to get anywhere. They're never going to get wealthy. They're never going to have a dynasty. They're never going to have real assets. But they're not going to rebel. They're not going to riot, because they are managed, right? Because of data and databases. So a relatively poor fisherman, he can exist because now he has technology to help him, with the catch and with selling the catch just in time before it spoils and blah, blah, blah. So this is how they explained, in this Google book by Eric Schmidt, what they're actually going to do. Creating some sort of a weird socialism where the few resources for the regular people are being distributed better, which was always thought of by leftists as the saving grace for socialism. Because socialism had failed so bad, but through more technology, they think it could work. Because you redistribute everything and you figure out everybody's headspace through technology. This is how they want to make socialism work. And what did Google do? Google became so left-wing, especially on YouTube when they bought that, using capitalist mechanisms to take over the online video market. And then it's censorship. It's like, okay, this outrageous censorship, and they can decide who gets monetized, who doesn't get monetized, who gets a push. A couple of months ago, I was asked in my YouTube account, owned by Google, YouTube is owned by Google. I was asked, you want to take a little survey to help creators? I'm thinking, okay, what could this be? So I click on, show me the questions. And then they ask me, am I from an ethnic minority? Am I straight, or am I some sort of LGBTQ plus or something? So basically, this is like, if I was an ethnic minority, if I was LGBTQ plus, I could have clicked yes. Please boost my channel. because I'm, I'm left, and I'm a minority, and I get the push, right? And so this is how the game is played. And I remember before the big censorship wave, maybe, I don't know, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I can't even remember. Before that, you had the conspiracy material, classic conspiracy mythology on YouTube, and so much alien UFO content. It was crazy. Free content, everybody could watch it for free, hours and hours in each day, and get into the UFO alien cult. And that was, and probably, I don't know what user data YouTube and Google still have, who watch this stuff. Right? They probably know who's interested or hooked on this UFO topic. So now they have to tie the UFO thing to socialism or, to so national Bolshevism type thing. Bingo. You can get to those people. So what else did they fund? The Decolonizing Wealth Project. Project Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations. All got money from the Ford Foundation, the Ford Foundation. Public Policy and Education Fund of New York. Florida
They're
Rising
funding
Together.
these leftist or communist think tanks and projects. Is that how you would characterize it?
Yeah, it's like this monstrosity creates organizations who create organizations who fund organizations that call themselves grassroots, which are anything but. Florida Rising Together. It's supposed to be a non-profit, right? Florida Rising Together, non-profit. It's a 501c3 organization, an educational group, not a political group, but it's blue. It's Democrat. How is that legal? How's that legal? Ford Foundation gave Florida Rising more than $3.7 million in 2022. Then, One Arizona, Power California, Family Values at Work, $6.5 million since 2022. Repower, $2.8 million. Center for Community Change, $650,000. Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition. Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity. The ACE or ACCE Institute. It's endless, right? And so then I went through this rather lengthy study from Samuel Collins Wells, Department of History, University of Cambridge. So I think this was a dissertation. The study is called The Ford Foundation and the Reinvention of American Liberalism. So this study is interesting, but I think it's a great missed opportunity because they do not make the link between what the people that Ford Foundation worked with and all this data gathering and psychometrics and figuring out populations and sometimes tying this to national security programs, but then it's used for left purposes. So So the big topics with the Ford Foundation was poverty, welfare, and crime, or handling crime. This was like the big categories of what they did. But every time they had a push, it was a counter push. And this became a problem for them. Sometimes this was mainline vanilla Republicans. Sometimes this was the John Birch Society. This was kind of the battle that was going on at the time, kind of similar to what we have today. So they created the Manpower Demonstration Research Corporation, the MDRC, think tank established by the Ford Foundation in 1973. So this was for figuring out welfare policy. Basically convincing the voters convincing the voters that the hope exists, that we can make this thing work. There can be socialism, and but everything they did kept failing really, really, really hard. So, drawing on its experiments with hard-to-employ populations, the MDRC claimed to have isolated the existence of an urban underclass, encompassing a category encompassing welfare mothers, people with substance abuse issues, high school dropouts, and the formerly incarcerated. According to the MDRC, these groups were united by their unwillingness to work, dependence on state assistance, and imperviousness to traditional poverty measures. So they were very clear about what they were dealing with. This is like their internal research-driven focus on that. So they've tried to figure out, study this underclass, and then try to turn them into permanent voters and change the way they think. Cause and effect, accountability or not having accountability. And we know how this went. This imagine multi-generational leftists, or people who think, well, it's always just the system. I don't have this responsibility. I can only fail, and if I fail, it's the system's fault. And never rising above that mindset, figuring out the system. I mean, some people call it poverty pimps, right? This was like a term that was thrown around at the time against these Ford Foundation funded people. Say they're poverty pimps. So they promise to end poverty, but they need poverty to stay in business. And they don't really want people to rise above this poverty. So then they created this new thing, this new vehicle, this new tool. They called it a Community Development Corporation, a CDC, a nonprofit institution that drew funding from both the public and private sectors. So they wanted to attract private capital and expertise to these low-class or underclass, as they called it, neighborhoods. So they had this whole network of CDCs across urban America. So it's like, does that sound like using other people's money to fund this leftist drive? You try to you take people's tax money, but you also try to attract business for these CDCs, and then just to manage this underclass, which they described. So these CDCs increasingly shifted into property development and other revenue-generating activities. Many groups had become quite substantial landlords and commercial property owners in their neighborhoods. Of course, that was to be expected. That was to be expected. Now, how did this even happen? So by the middle of the 1930s, the Ford Motor Company had become one of the largest family-owned companies in the United States, leaving it vulnerable to FDR's 1936 Tax Reform Act. Seeking to utilize exemptions in the Act for bequests to charitable institutions, Henry Ford established the Ford Foundation in January of 1936. It was tax avoidance. Henry and his son, Edsel Ford, rewrote their wills to ensure that 90% of the non-voting stock of Ford Motor Company would be funneled to the foundation after their deaths. So, after World War II, the booming post-war profits of the Ford Motor Company found their way into the foundation's coffers, swelling its balance sheet as well as the ambitions of its board of trustees. So, what do you think happened? How did this? How do you come from a family that mass prints the fake protocols of Zion and gets and sends like these love messages to the Germans, to the Nazis, and getting love messages back from them. How does that turn into this funneling of the money into this foundation, which then becomes a backbone of the left? How
Well,
does
because I think if you look at the tax exempt foundations, I think what you're going to see is that one of the things they have taxes that will break up big fortunes. So they created the tax exempt foundations. It's a tax relief to be able to give something to their descendants. And of course, who are the descendants of Ford? Are they liberals? Are they people who are a little embarrassed by their father's, embrace of anti-Semitism and Adolf Hitler back in the 1930s? And then, of course, when you have these tax-exempt foundations, they're managed by people outside the family. So who do they hire? I believe the communists targeted these tax-exempt foundations for infiltration. So what you find is you find in some of them that people got in there to manage this money who were, I think, part of the communist apparatus. That's if you look at some of the congressional investigations in the early 50s when people were really looking at communist infiltration, you'll see that there's evidence that this money, the communists always go for the money. They see where this money is, and there's all this money up for grabs because part of it is they give money away. And of course, these people get free salaries. They give the money to their friends. They create these projects, these leftist projects. And this is how you can kind of identify them. So, and this is all over our system. I mean, people on the right, people like me or you, are not going to be funded in the United States by any of these projects. They're just not. You have to be part of an organized body that actually has the faithful who are devoting their lives to this infiltration and to getting on board with these things and taking things over. That's how you're going to get advanced. And I remember this from when I was in college, seeing how these people were talking about, they were back when I was in college, they were talking about pension fund capitalism and how they were going to use pension fund money from unions and stuff to create all these funds. Well, this is partly how they funded the left in the years since. This
Yeah.
is another
And it
scheme.
seems like when I read this study, it seems like there was a clever bit of psychological gaming going on. So because at first, we're just saving taxes. We just don't want to give that money away. In tax to the government, and then I think as like a defensive strategy, they brought in to the Ford Foundation, they brought in people from business, academia, think tanks, and even the military, right? And I think this was
Well,
often
the problem is when they bring in people from academia, because the academia, especially the Ivy League schools on the East Coast, Eric Vergelin, who went to go get hired at these schools, found that they were just full of, Marxist ideologues. That's why he went to teach at Louisiana State. This is in the 1930s and 40s when he was, had left because of the Anschluss. He was working at the university in Austria, in Vienna. And he came to the United States and he said, I can't work at these places because I couldn't stand the Nazis in the universities in Germany when, and he couldn't stand the Marxists in the American universities. People don't realize this was a haven for American Marxism. So for you get a tax exempt foundation and you don't want the money, you're saying, all right, if I'm going to be taxed, I'm going to decide where the money goes. Well, what makes you think that the rich descendants of Mr. Ford or Mr. Ford in his older years is going to be very discerning about who's coming in and telling him how to use the money?
Yeah, yeah. And it's like when you get a communist infiltration, cells and agents and officers, sleeper agents, and that sort of thing. When you get a communist infiltration like that, it's like you can lure in more people right into this. You can lure in the military. You can lure in the think tanks. I think there was even some people involved that were tied to the Rand Corporation. So you can connect with these people. lure them in by saying, yeah, it seems totally left on the surface, but actually we're just spying on the left, we're studying the left, we're understanding the left, so we can control the left. It's all going to be fine, but it's still an infiltration, right? And it's like some people, they cannot pass up this opportunity. Some military guys, they think, oh yeah, we could, this is a cool thing, buying up parts of the leftist sphere so we can control it. This sounds great. So this is how you lure in more people.
Yeah, I mean the Ford Foundation, and it's like you say, Ford was not a left winger himself. He had this, I mean, when the Wehrmacht began World War II, it had the Panzer divisions had Ford trucks for their motorized element, right?
Köln, yeah, it's the city
Because
of
Ford had
Köln or Cologne. They made
built a factory. Was it in Cologne where he had the factory? Um, so the Ford Foundation, but it's funny after this right wing Ford, with the anti-Semitism and being sued by um, Jacob Schiff's relatives for slandering him, claiming that Jacob Schiff had funded the Jewish banker, the leading American Jewish person, the leader of the international Jewry was Jacob Schiff. Really, he was the most probably the most distinguished Jewish leader in worldwide, a Lower East Side Jewish American banker. He accused him of this, and it was false. I think it was in 1925 or 26 that they won their case. The Schiffs won. Jacob Schiff had died of a heart attack in 1920. He did not want to sue Ford, but his children were so upset by the accusation, they did sue him. And of course, they won, and Ford had to do a mea culpa. It's like, it's not true. Schiff didn't finance a Bolshevik revolution. It's not a Jewish, there's this Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy thing. I mean, it was Hitler's whole thing was Jewish Bolshevism, right? Which is a canard. I mean, even Alexander Solzhenitsyn in his book, 200 Years Together, and I've read a good part of that. He says the Jews as a group were not behind the Bolshevik Revolution. A lot of Jewish businesses were wiped out. This was a point that Jacob Schiff made. Jacob Schiff got the global Jewish community to support the Admiral Kolchak of the White Army, not to support the Bolsheviks because they were wiping out Jewish businesses in Russia. I mean, this is documented. There's a very good biography of Jacob Schiff, by the way, that came out about it was more than a decade ago. That was I have it. It's very good. It explains all of this, documents everything. But the Ford Foundation took this left turn, and it has faced criticism from conservative observers for funding many organizations characterized as radical. Well, they are radical, and they have financed climate activism and social justice initiatives. And so an example is the Center for Popular Democracy. I think you've mentioned these, the Sunrise Movement Education Fund, Florida Rising, Democratic Council for the Arab World, Movement for Black Lives, which is, they've historically supported various groups under Black Lives Matter umbrella as part of its focus on racial reckoning. So, the Black Lives Matter was a Maoist, Marxist trained. Its leaders were Chinese, communist trained American blacks. So, think about that for a minute. That's pretty horrible.
And for the longest time, I mean, socialists, before we had mass-produced cars and all these cool things. Socialists were saying that capitalism would fail fundamentally in every shape or form. This would always be completely miserable. Then companies or corporations like Ford, they had well-paid workers at the time, and even when the Germans tried their National Socialism, they couldn't make cars for profit. They had like an early version of the Volkswagen Beetle. This was like an early draft of that car, and this was supposed to be a civilian vehicle. So more Germans would have their own vehicle, but they calculated they would lose money, significant amounts of money with every car sold. Meanwhile, in America, even the lowest paid guy who worked for Ford, even the lowest paid guy who worked for Ford, was living much better than these German people. These American Ford workers, they had better apartments, they had central heating at the time. They live better than these German people, even some more privileged Germans. And so this was quite a big problem for socialists to see that, these workers are paid well, they can afford to buy these products, they can buy Ford cars even. Then there's a tire business, there's like a gasoline business, and then these people drive around. So there's these bars popping up and restaurants popping up because people can see the countryside and they can drive around. There's tourism industries, more money going around. This was a nightmare for the communists. I mean, I drove in the past. I drove a Ford Explorer. A Ford Explorer, the midsize SUV, and some people ask me, why do you drive an American car? And I said, this is actually the German version. They had a German version of the Explorer until, I think, 2003, right until the start of the third generation. We didn't get the third generation Explorer. And so they had a German version, and some of the internal parts were made by Bosch, legendary German company. Internal parts made by Bosch. Then I think all the Explorers in the world, first generation and second generation, all the Explorers in the world, they had the same base engine, the 6-cylinder engine, gasoline engine, 4-liter, and this was the Cologne engine, because I think they were all built in Cologne and then shipped around to Kentucky or whatever, or some of these other factories to be put into Explorers, right? So it's like there's like this German DNA was all over the car. It was all over the car. So Ford was a nightmare for the socialists, but then they kind of got their way in, and then the Ford Foundation became so leftist. Now, with the election of John F. Kennedy in 1960. Ford Foundation reached the height of its influence on the federal government. Alongside Kennedy's enthusiastic embrace of Ford-funded modernization theory as the framework for his foreign policy, the Ford Foundation worked closely with Robert Kennedy at the Department of Justice, helping to provide expertise for his coordinated attack on juvenile delinquency in America's inner cities. Weird. Then in the early years, president of the foundation was McGeorge Bundy. Now, that's a guy he was McGeorge Bundy is an old family. He was national security advisor to Presidents John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson, chief architects of the United States effort in the Vietnam War, and then president of the Ford Foundation from 1966 through 1979. Professor of government at Harvard University, youngest dean for the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, scholar in residence at the Carnegie Corporation. Interesting guy. The Bundys were close to Henry L. Stimson. As Secretary of State under Herbert Hoover in 1931, Stimson appointed Bundy's father as his Assistant Secretary of State. Later, when Stimson was Secretary of War in World War II, Harvey Bundy served again under Stimson as Special Assistant on Atomic Matters. And it just goes on and on. So that's the guy who, the Bundy family, who ran the Ford Foundation. Strangely enough. They embarked on a controversial effort to fund a range of civil rights and even black power groups. And it's not so much the super Maoist Black Power Panther type groups. So it was more like black empowerment groups, like early Black Lives Matter, blah groups. That's what they funded. Which is kind of strange. Now, I'm wondering what would have become of this civil rights movement if it wasn't for the Ford Foundation, and if it wasn't for some of these other entities that were putting money into it. Because this is
Well, and
always
you
like,
know how much money, just to give people an idea, this isn't a small amount of money. Their Build initiative, which is financing the equality, racial equality, getting rid of racism, which really supports these leftist groups and critical race theory. That's $2 billion they put into that. Now
wow.
think, there's nothing financing the right, except the Russians may be financing these right-wing podcasters. There's nothing financing the right like that. Those of us on the right who've been writers and have worked, we've had to have day jobs. We weren't funded. We live very poor lives, relatively speaking. These people on the left, they have big houses, they write stuff, they promote things, and they get lots of money because they're funded, and there's lots of them, and they get cranked out of universities, and they go from universities into these jobs that are funded by these things like the Ford Foundation and these projects. So all of these radicals have a golden future in front of them.
Yeah.
This is why you gravitate towards this in college. You know that there's a career in this. Whereas if
Yeah,
you
we
are
and we
actually looking for the truth, and you really care about your country, and you're not an ideologue,
yeah.
you're kind
And
of out in
and
the
the
cold.
DNA, the Ford Foundation DNA goes on and on, right through Bill Clinton and right through Barack Obama,
Oh yeah.
who was kind of a community organizer type, exactly the template that the Ford Foundation had come up with, and we had a whole episode or multiple episodes on Kamala Harris and her way to where she ultimately ended up. This limousine liberal, this princess with perfect makeup and perfect lighting, and sounding like too much wine, too much expensive wine. This is the system that they've created, and Bundy's successor as Ford Foundation president was Franklin Thomas, a black man born and raised in Bedford Stuyvesant. He had been a deputy police commissioner before heading up Ford's pioneering Community Development Corporation in Bedford Stuyvesant. So then, the Clinton Democrats directly appropriated the policy innovations that the Ford Foundation had crafted since 1968. Clinton's pledge to place 100,000 more police officers on the street, key component of the 1994 crime bill, was sold by the administration as an effort to put federal resources behind the broken windows revolution begun by the so-called Police Foundation.
I should mention that Maya Harris, because you mentioned Vice President Kamala Harris, the sister of Kamala Harris, um, she served for the president as the vice president, rights and justice for the Ford Foundation. So the sisters were both vice presidents. One of them the vice president of the United States. The other one was the vice president of this part of the Ford Foundation's. Um,
Yeah, and wasn't it
you know,
Obama's mother? Wasn't Obama? I think you have that somewhere here. Obama's mother. I think she had something to do with the Ford Foundation. It's somewhere in my notes. It's like,
Well, yeah, and the Biden and Harris administration, just as a whole, the Ford Foundation coalition of philanthropies pledged over 200 million to support initiatives aligned with Harris's push for equitable AI. They had this idea of equitable AI. Have you heard of this?
no,
Artificial intelligence that's equitable. And protecting public interest in technology, and so they're trying to insert critical race theory build it into the AI, right?
terrific.
Is
Terrific.
that is
So
scary or what? So AI, thinking that AI is something neutral, politically neutral, is not accurate. It is not politically neutral. You have people actually pushing to make corporations design AI to incorporate their ideological, equality, critical race theory. And just to remind people, critical race theory isn't about the equality of white people and black people. It's about the inequality. It's promoting the idea that white people are bad because they're inherently racist
yeah, and also
and they have to
there's
be
like,
put down. White people have to be discriminated against because they're racists. They're Nazis by nature, right? So if you have blonde hair and blue eyes, you're a bad person.
yeah, you're white
I mean,
white devil.
that's
Yeah,
what it is.
yeah,
Critical
yeah.
race theory. That's what
You're
it
a
is.
white
It's
devil.
anti-white racism. Yeah, we're the white devils. So this
Yeah,
is really
it's
this
like
is scary if
this.
you're a white person. You're thinking, "Oh my God, now
Yeah,
it's my turn to be stumped." And I
isn't
had
it
a
funny?
government official in California tell me, "Well, it's your turn to be discriminated against now." It's like,
Okay.
well, yeah, I experienced that my whole life. You know,
Yeah, and
I
every time,
wasn't because I was anti-communist. Of course, I was assured not to get a good job.
yeah, and every
People
time you
don't
see one
realize
of
it's
those,
really communism.
you
Yeah.
see one of those leftist movies. I mean, even the original Star Wars movie, right? The rebels against the Empire, and George Lucas's inspiration for the rebels being, communist insurgents and all that. Every time there's something like this, like a movie or a story like that, the rebels are organized and they do have funding. Not as much as the Empire, but significant, right? I mean, you look at the rebels in Star Wars then fighting against the Empire. They do have airplanes, they do have military bases, they do have structures, and this is like the excitement that these foundations try to generate with these groups that they pay for. They recruit members, and they think that it's just like in the movies a bit. It's like I joined this rebellion, and this rebellion is funded. They have resources, they have structures. It's everything I wanted. Because if you try this on your own, no money, no structure, people cannot get things done. People cannot be, enticed to actually spend their time and do something substantial. I mean, this is like when oftentimes you can tell this is amateurs or this is something controlled. A lot of these amateurs, they cannot work together, and they cannot be productive. But every time, even sometimes in the right, with shady money coming in, sometimes from abroad, sometimes from the Russians or Qatar or Iran or whatever, sometimes then there's money coming in, there's experts, and then they recruit Americans, and they think, oh, finally, I'm part of a rebellion and I get paid. They can actually pay me a salary. And I get medical. I can pay medical insurance. I can stash money aside. There's an office. There's a structure. There's contacts. This is exciting. This is great. Or a young Barack Obama or a young Kamala Harris thinking, this is the perfect rebellion. They've got something going on. This is exciting. I'm going to get behind this. Because if there wasn't this money, would they join it? That's doubtful, right? Now, here, Barack Obama's life and presidency represented the apotheosis and then decline of the Ford Foundation's brand of American liberalism. The son of a Ford Foundation employee who worked for nonprofits in Chicago during the 1980s, Obama regularly invoked the importance of voluntarism, community, and philanthropy. Obama also championed the Police Foundation's brand of community-oriented policing to tackle problems of crime and law enforcement. Yeah, I think I have some more on this. This was Obama's mother. Let me just pull that up, because that is really, really significant if we think about it. This is this is Dunham, Stanley and Dunham. So Obama was the first president raised after the 1960s. In crucial ways, he was shaped by the new brand of liberalism then being constructed by the Ford Foundation. His experience in Chicago organizing communities, writing grant applications, and liaising with charitable funders. His mother, Stanley Ann Dunham, worked for the Ford Foundation in Indonesia. When Ford President Franklin Thomas visited Jakarta, it was Ann Dunham who showed him around. While critical of his mother's idealistic position paper liberalism, Barack Obama ultimately followed her into the nonprofit sector. And then it was hardly surprising that Obama's Office of Social Innovation was run by Sonal Shah, a former vice president of Goldman Sachs, who previously headed Google's philanthropic arm, Global Development Initiatives. It's Google again. As I said, very old book by Eric Schmidt, who used to be the boss of Google, when he said that, it's all technology, and these people, these regular poor people, they will get along with what they have better because of our technology. So they will not really get wealthy. They will not have dynasties or anything, but they can sell their stuff. They can work, and there will be no uprisings. And by the way, he talked about uprisings and insurgencies. He said that with all this technology nowadays, these insurgents have a huge problem because either they avoid technology and then they're too slow, they cannot function, or they use technology, but then they get caught because of all the backdoors and all the, digital pixie fairy dust that sticks to everything, all the device fingerprinting and snooping and spying. So that's the choice of, that will be the choice of these insurgents and possible insurgents. Either stay away from technology and be insignificant, or try to use technology and get caught. And this is kind of like the socialism that they apparently have in mind. Uprising will be made impossible. Total surveillance. Nobody can exist. No insurgency can hide anywhere. No insurgency can feed itself. No insurgency will ever have anything because of the system. If people try a mini insurgency, they get squashed hard. But if they stay good little citizens, they can exist, they can live, they can catch fish and then sell it online, and they're gonna live. But an uprising will be a real uprising against the socialist system, will be financially impossible, practically impossible, total surveillance, and people will be afraid to join any insurgency against this communist system. They will not join an insurgency because they are afraid of losing their place in society. Because in a communist system or a socialist system, nobody has anything. So a rebellion against that system will not be like Star Wars or whatever, where the insurgents have a system. They have nothing.
That's and you don't have to even call it a communist system. If the state takes over businesses or directs it, the system, and you have high taxation and redistribution of wealth, you have a system that then, and this is the problem with the American system, how it's evolved. You have this vast university system, which creates people's careers. It sets people up for life, and it teaches them socialism. And it evolved through the 80s and 90s to this thing where, all right, you're going to be a teacher, you're going to be a government bureaucrat, or you're going to be in business. Well, if you're in business, you don't even belong here. But we can set you up with a career in these programs, and what else? What else are you going to use your education, which is so filled with disguised Marxist ideas, unless you work for one of these organizations or the government? And of course, this is why do government bureaucrats, more than 80% of them, vote Democrat? Which the Democratic Party, as some of my friends have pointed out, and I knew this back in the 80s, was taken over by the communists. The Communist Party USA doesn't run candidates anymore. They say vote Democrat because they infiltrated the Democratic Party and took it over through its left wing. And I heard communists in the early 80s saying that's our plan. And you look at the Obamas, and you look at Biden, and you look at Clinton, and you look at these foundations, and you see they're all on the same page with all this stuff. That everything they're saying in critical race theory is outright Marxism. They put that in the U.S. military. They made, General Mark Milley, when he testified before Congress, I was shocked, him saying, we need this, and we need this to, equalize the racial injustices of the past. It's like, now we got to call white people racist. Well, why did they do that? Because white Americans are the backbone of the middle class. They're the class that basically the free market and capitalism work off of. They're the people with the folkways and the personal traditions and the values that make an entrepreneurial society, right? And of course, black people, before welfare for black people were very entrepreneurial. This was pointed out um, uh, by the great American economist Thomas Sowell. Wrote about this, how blacks started their own schools, their own businesses. They did it all with their own money and their own initiative. Then comes the welfare state. If you want to destroy somebody, give them freebies from the government. Look at the American Indian and what handouts have done to the American Indian, what they're doing to other people, what they're doing to the white community now. You've got all these single white mothers. You think they're any different than the single black mothers?
Mm.
They give welfare to everybody. The same thing happens to any group you give things to. That was Thomas Sowell's thing. Socialism wrecks initiative. It destroys your will. It takes away your pride. It takes away all kinds of things. And yet they promote this that doesn't work. It doesn't work. Socialism didn't work in the Soviet Union. Yeah. Market socialism, maybe kind of state capitalism, but still, that's just a military industrial complex.
Yeah, and so eventually, when the Ford Foundation, when they had their first successes and they were sprawling all over the country, doing their thing, they noticed a backlash from the right, as was to be expected. Now, they didn't quite expect the backlash to be that big or to be that multifaceted, and it was all kinds of things. It was vanilla conservatism that rebelled against this. It was the John Birch Society, which was a very strange organization, because the John Birch Society, the Birch Society kind of sounded a bit like the left when it came to pointing the fingers at all these corporations and Council on Foreign Relations and that sort of thing, but they were doing it in an unprofessional way. I think they were the Birchers were happy to take money from some billionaires, but then they started attacking. They started wildly attacking mainline candidates, and the Birch Society positioned itself as the gatekeeper, the end-all, be-all, best anti-communist group in the whole world, and what they say goes. So now they started to attack presidents and presidential candidates and making all kinds of wild accusations. But it was a backlash. By the late 1960s, this became the overriding preoccupation of the Ford Foundation: how to continue working for social change, yet without provoking a white backlash. Isn't it interesting that now we see all these popular cranks? They say they're right wing, but now they're saying vote Democrat because we got angry at the Republicans, and it's just weirdness coming into conservative circles, especially targeting the young people. And I think this is something which, of course, the left always wanted to do. Because how do you prevent such a backlash? Well, you make things more complicated. You try to reach some of these poor white people or frustrated white people, and you try to come at them from a somewhat different angle.
Look at Nick Fuentes is telling people to vote Democrat.
Yeah, to punish the Republican Party.
As if all these Republicans in Congress, who it's going to be a vote over Congress in the fall, as if these people are also basically Trumpites, as if what Donald Trump has done in Iran and has done to make Nick Fuentes angry has anything to do with what the Republicans in Congress want.
Yeah, and now we get
right?
this. Now we get. I think Dan Bilzerian wants to run for office, and Marjorie Taylor Greene has big plans, and General Flynn has big plans, and blah
To
blah.
tell me what I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene is. I thought she was leaving politics. She has big plans.
Well, she has this idea of a. Well, she's entertaining different notions. Maybe a third party, or maybe
Ugh.
maybe a retake over or some kind of takeover of the Republicans or whatever. Or it's just like this. When people call it this horseshoe theory, when the extreme left and the extreme right, they kind of start to agree on many things. Recently, Candace Owens has called for the left and the right sort of coming together, but in a specific way, the way that she prefers.
This
Um,
sounds like Dugan is jumping up and down cheering, right? Alexander Dugan.
yeah, and people have noticed. I mean, people have tried to expose Candace Owens' lifestyle with the young Lord Farmer, or this aristocratic son that she's married, the houses that they supposedly own, the car collection that they supposedly have, the clothing that Candace has, the jewelry that she
Do
has.
they live in the U.S. or the U.K.? Since she's
Candace,
married to a British guy,
yeah, but they live in the U.S. and
they live in the U.S.
yeah, and there's some allegations now that have been known in conservative circles for a while, and this has potentially a catastrophic effect on farmers, citizenship or residency. There's like this whole thing online going on right now. Yeah, but it's like, how do you push this leftist thing and try to mitigate the right wing backlash, right?
Well,
So
it's this old thing that you had with Lyndon LaRouche, Lyndon LaRouche was a teacher in the 60s of Marxism Leninism, and in 1971 he tried to create a right-wing Marxist party, the U.S. Labor Party. He ended up creating the LaRouche movement, but he was associated with the KGB. LaRouche was, and he was trying to find a way to create a right wing. That is, you talk about I mean, this is not even new. This idea of bringing the right together with the left. And it goes back to Hitler. I mean, that's exactly what Hitler did in Germany. He united the far left and the far right, didn't he?
yeah,
Isn't that really what Hitler did in Germany?
well, it's like if you if you look at the building blocks of an ideology, I mean, it's like um, sometimes you can take out a few blocks of somebody else's ideology. You take out a few blocks, add very few blocks, and then you can tell it's yours, right? You can add the ethnic component to it, or you can just remove the ethnic component to it. It's like a place
I
set.
mean,
It's
isn't
like
it
Lego
funny? The
bricks.
Republican Party is now the workers' party, the party of the lower middle class, of the blue collar people.
Yeah, well,
It's the right. I mean, it's kind of funny. It's a kind of funny transformation, and Trump is credited with this. We had Pat Buchanan was moving the party in this direction with his rhetoric. Um, there's this transformation, and of course, you have both MAGA people and people on the far left attacking neoconservatives, people who want a strong defense policy, people who see America's role in the world as the the post-war world order, keeping back these rogue states from disrupting the world order. And now, of course, there, even when Trump has done something against Iran, probably just to distract from the Epstein files, according to Anthony Scaramucci. I don't know if anyone's seen his interview with Vlad Vexler, but it's quite illuminating because Anthony Scaramucci knows Trump. But even then, they are determined on this, what would be the 60s hippies against the Vietnam War. They seem to be just about an iteration of that, who claim to be conservatives, claim to be religious conservatives. I mean, look at Marjorie Taylor Greene. Do you believe she's a Christian? Does anybody believe that
yeah,
about her?
anybody can say that. It's like doing this, you know, just figuring out what the audience wants to hear, and then say, yeah, I'm totally that, and this is my words, and words mean everything, because the internet is full of words. Everybody's talking, right? Everybody's talking now, so you can just pretend to be with a group, right? But that's like when activists don't really know each other, or people try to organize with each other, but you can't really tell who these people are. The Ford Foundation created a machine, a well-oiled machine, where they can select candidates and they can recruit candidates, and they recruit somebody for an organization, for front organization, right? And they see how he does, and then they watch others how they perform, and then they can promote the guys that they like the most, that they prefer. And so this is how you can go from a community organizer to the president of the United States of America, like Obama did. And it's like this. There's like another component to this. The security, surveillance, and digital component here. Now that everybody's talking about Palantir, this smart software that can be used for police work, intelligence work, military work. You figure out where the enemy is, or what's he gonna do, where he's gonna do something, how to allocate your own resources so you have the maximum effect. That's practically what the products of Palantir do. Now, Palantir gets new contracts all the time. You get people like Peter Thiel, I think Alex Karp. There's like this whole Epstein connection to that, but it's built as a conservative thing, right? It's marketed as a very conservative thing. But I always said that, Palantir, this is like the old, this seems like a continuation of the old Project Camelot, Project Troy. This is from the Cold War, when the U.S. was trying to figure out these other countries like Iran or Chile. So they sent in scientists, or they worked with local scientists and experts on the population. What population segments do we have? How big are they? How do they function? What do they want? What do they fear? Where do they live? How do they live? And so they try to create this map of a country, so you can have some sort of a prediction capability. What would the enemy try? What would be successful when the enemy tries it? How can we prevent that? How can we stabilize a country like Iran or Chile or whatever? And so this was put into early types of simulations. How you can simulate a country going out of control, or you simulate stabilizing a country. And now, as I mentioned McGeorge Bundy running the Ford Foundation. He had served as national security advisor, earning the enmity of anti-war activists for his hawkish stance on Vietnam. After becoming president at Ford Foundation, Bundy reinvented himself as a champion for the dispossessed, penance, as critics said, for the sins of Vietnam. In his first major speech, he pledged to shift the foundation's resources towards assisting the Black freedom struggle, which he labeled the most urgent domestic concern of this country. He swiftly began moving forward funds towards civil rights groups, including the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the Urban League, as well as examining the prospect of assisting more radical Black power organizations. Bundy's transition into domestic race relations drew on his foreign policy expertise. Because Bundy had spent the past 5 years focused on the communist insurgency in Vietnam. He viewed the race riots that ripped through the United States as America's own homegrown insurgency. Like in Vietnam, Bundy was confident that liberal policymakers could channel discontent with its nebulous aspirations for self-determination in ways conducive to justice and stability. So this is kind of like, Project Troy, Project Camelot, or Palantir. Let's figure these people out. Let's apply what we learned over here, apply it over there, and it's all going to work out as if you have a crystal ball, or like a literal palantir, because the names from Lord of the Rings, this crystal ball type thing. It seems like this seems like an outlandish idea. Oh, we learned in Vietnam, now we can apply it to black communities in America and prevent riots, prevent insurgencies by paying them, by paying these activist groups and organizing them. We're gonna just prevent the worst. We're gonna prevent a black insurgency in America. Well, they prevented a black insurgency in America for the time, but the Ford Foundation created like this bigger thing that was festering and growing and growing and growing in America, leading to a potential future insurgency, or sort of like a different way, a different kind of insurgency. Not like, let's grab some AK rifles and take over the local seats of government, but rather let's become politicians, let's become community organizers, and eventually we'll be the politicians. So this is like our insurgencies wearing suits, not wearing bandanas and berets and running around with AKs. Would that be a fair assessment? Is that what trying to put out the fire by putting out more fires, smaller fires in more places?
Well, I mean, they create a problem and then they create the solution, right? This is what they do. But it's to understand, I wanted to talk about Matthias Desmet and his work based on Gustav Le Bon's study of crowd psychology, mass formation, and of course, Le Bon's neglected works, The Psychology of Socialism and The Psychology of Revolutions. They're all interconnected because Le Bon is saying that there's a mind virus, that socialism is basically a mind virus. It's a thing that doesn't work, but it's like a substitute religion that people fall for. It tells people they can have everything now. They can have power, they can have money, or they can have this perfect society. And people say, oh, that's the future. Socialism is the future. We want it. Even Hitler, he had to call his movement National Socialism. Socialism was such a big thing. It's in everything. And of course, you can't use that word here in America because the word's got a dirty association in American history. But yet, if you look at MAGA, it's basically embraced all the socialist elements. And you have this with Desmet's work. He talks about the pandemic and how big government, and how hysteria and fear are used by ideologues, by people who basically hypnotize large masses of suggestible people, and that once people want to join or want to belong to a group or a movement, they're not intelligent anymore. They will go with whatever their leaders say. We see this, the Democratic Party. It was funny. One of Clinton's political advisors, I'm forgetting his name, he said, Democrats are stupid. They're just a giant herd. There's more thinking for themselves among Republicans. Now with MAGA, these people don't think for themselves either. The charisma of the one leader, there's almost a kind of Führer principle here. They're breaking with it because Trump is so erratic. They're really, the MAGA movement is in character part of this mass formation, only it's on the right now instead of on the left, where it's a mind virus. They've all caught it. The analysis is not intelligence. They're supporting things that communists and socialists supported in the past. They've just put religion and other conservative talking points they've attached to it. Like you said, they remove some things here, they put some things, but it's quite harmless to Russia, for example, and China, our enemies, in terms of what they actually do. Just like with the Democrats, they would never hurt China or Russia intentionally. They might not always help Russia and China because they've got their own interests, but they're they're ideologically aligned and they're influenced by Russian active measures and Chinese money. So you've got the same thing going here on in both parties. It's a disaster. You've got it in Germany with the AfD, the leader who lived in, and one of the leaders of the AfD who lived in China
Yeah.
and who's a
Yeah.
lesbian.
Yeah.
How is the AfD a conservative party?
Yeah, well, it's like they have these the AFD, like many organizations, they have these layers and these secrets, and there was money being thrown around. There was secret organizers going from place to place and steering things, and they got this lesbian leader got interviewed about these shadowy things, and others got interviewed about it, and they kind of said, yeah, we are scared of that guy, that guy who's looking around in the background and steering things, and everybody's afraid of him. Nobody wants to go against him, and nobody quite knows who he works for or who he is. That's the reality of it. And I think that with all this, organizational, structural, construct that we see on the left, and increasingly that we see the same chaos or the same apparent chaos on the right, there's a public structure and there's a secret structure. This goes back to the communist cell model. You have like an underlying deep super secret structure, and then you have the more visible kinds of structures. And many prefer even the German far right kind of operates like this. There's like the official structures, and there's the unofficial structures. And not even high party members really understand these hidden structures. They just know that, okay, what this guy says goes. If I go with this guy, I get reelected.
Well, it's a herd thing. People talk about conspiracies when mass formation, when these things are driven by belief. People say, oh, nobody, a lot of these people who study economics and are convinced conservatives or libertarians, they don't believe anybody really believes in socialism. They don't really understand because they don't hang out. They don't interact with socialists, so they don't understand. These people are driven. They really believe it. It's like a religion. This is what Desmet says about how this emerged. Throughout history, the leaders of the masses have been perceived as conspirators, right? So you see some demagogue, he's got his own little thing going, he's a conspirator. As the masses grew in strength and intensity throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, as democracy and equality became the thing, conspiracy theories also emerged. These conspiracy theories were typically used to explain complex social processes and mass formations. The Nazi movement's really a conspiracy of the elites, or the communist movement is itself. The socialist movement is a Jewish conspiracy. So he goes on, the mother of all of them is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, whose popularity, according to Henry Rowland, was second only to the Bible in the early 20th century. It proclaimed that there was some kind of secret Jewish world government that controlled and ruled over all national governments. I mean, just listen to Nick Fuentes, right? Or these other, Candace Owens. Despite its massive popularity, the protocols were a fabrication. Their fictitious origin is beyond dispute. They are based on a text published by French lawyer Maurice Joly in 1864 under the title Dialogue in Hell between Machiavelli and Montesquieu. And we've discussed this many times on the show, a kind of pamphlet in which the author denounced Napoleon III's hunger for power. The text was edited and distorted by the Russian Secret Service Okhrana in the late 1800s with the intention of fueling anti-Semitism in Russia. The Okhrana retained about half of the original text, adding a few paragraphs left and right, and consistently replacing France with the world and Napoleon III with the Jews. This is how they did it. In this way, they manufactured a text in which Theodor Herzl, founder of Zionism, was the head of a Jewish conspiracy that aspired to world domination. The forged pamphlet was published in 1905, at which point Russian conservatives and the Orthodox Russians eagerly adopted it to justify their anti-Semitic agenda. So this is Desmet's explaining this mind virus of anti-Semitism, which has been called the stupid man's socialism, basically. and this was what fueled Nazism, a very low grade, Nazi. It's not like there's a consistent intellectual, rational thing going on there with Nazism. It's they're appealing to these deep seated this mind virus that they're appealing to people's resentments and anxiety and their fears. And they're saying, these people, if we just got rid of these people, right, everything's going to be all right. And it's the Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy and Jewish finance capital. So it's both the left and the right are part of the conspiracy. But Hitler's then joining the left and the right. He goes to the workers and he says, I'm fighting Jewish finance capital. He goes to the capitalists and he goes, I'm fighting Jewish Bolshevism to save, capitalism. I mean, you can have your cake and eat it too. And you see this with, on the right in the United States. It's National Socialism without the name, with Tucker Carlson, with Candace Owens, with all of these people who've adopted this way of talking.
Yeah, and once once you see the breakdown of this mythology, right? You say, okay, so the protocols are fake. Okay, what else? What is the foundation of this mythology? Okay, protocols. It was not a leak. It's not some oh my God, it's this great leak and primary evidence. As if you can get this was it a transcript of this very important
It's
meeting.
just total fabrication. The whole thing is just a fabrication. Like, people violently believe in it.
Yeah. So it's like it's not a leak. It's absolutely completely worthless. So what else do we got? The Rothschild fairy tales. All of them are false. They didn't take over. They didn't steal from the House of Hessen. They didn't steal from the British Crown. They didn't take over.
They wouldn't dare.
They didn't take over the city of London. They didn't take over controlled the central bank and controlled all the money and controlled the British Empire. None of that was true. You had these very scattered little Jewish communities, and they were scattered in different empires. And different empires try to control them, try to recruit some of them to use them for various things. And so when you see, a Jewish person went to Britain and became a big shot, or a family in the United States, or somebody important in the United States has a Jewish background and a migrant background because the parents or grandparents came from Poland or Russia or the Baltics, Germany or south of France or Italy. That could mean 100 different things, because the Elders of Zion don't exist. The Rothschild myths are false. Tons of other myths are outright false. So what are you left? These scattered little populations that had to exist under various empires. And sometimes Jews got recruited, or even forcefully recruited, by different empires, sometimes for secret stuff. And like other people got recruited, like regular white people got recruited for secret missions. The Muslims had espionage. Everybody had espionage. It's like you create...
And a lot of this came out of espionage, by the way. Remember, the Okhrana was the Tsar's secret police that created the forgery. So an intelligence service of a major power, Russia, in 1905, created this thing or published it.
Yeah, and
right?
also it's like the
set on the loose.
The British tried to weaken their arch rival nemesis France by amplifying this conspiracy nonsense, because the British did not want the French to be stable and have foreign capital and blah blah blah. So there was the French kind of the French they needed money so bad and industrialized so bad. So the French would actually allow the Rothschild family or a part of the Rothschild family to invest in France, but this was under French control. This railway eventually got nationalized and all that, so it was French control. But still, the socialists. It was the socialists first who did this Jewish conspiracy nonsense. The French socialists these French socialists, they played this conspiracy card and said, "Look at the Rothschilds. They came from the Germany or whatever, and they're all powerful and they want to take over the world, and now they're building these railway lines, these railroads in France, and then the average Frenchman has to pay money to use the railway system." And there's other foreign capital coming in, and there's like, we don't like this, it's bad, it's terrible. It's like when you have this thing in people's minds, be it the classic conspiracy mythology, or be it socialism, or be it something else. When you have that in the minds of the people, it's like something you can access. It's like you can hack into that and create like a botnet on the web. You just link up with these people and say what they want to hear, and you have the money, so you can promise a new push, you can promise success, and then they follow you. And when you get heat, you can tell your followers, "Look, I'm being successful. The bad guys are after me. I'm sacrificing for you guys. We're all in this together. We're battling these devils." And so this is like a pattern. This is like a mechanism that can be repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated. And sometimes people forget that there's anything else but these mythologies, right? There's like, it's like when Americans, sometimes when Americans, when Americans, even patriotic Americans, when they stop reading and they stop understanding the fabric of America, and they're not progressing in their wisdom, they're not progressing in their idea, they just remembered some names and wave a flag. Oh yeah, George Washington. Yeah, Thomas Jefferson. What do they actually know about George Washington or Thomas Jefferson? What do they know about all that came afterwards and all the other empires that the Americans competed against? So it's like, yeah, a few names, they just, and treat that like a cult, right? They think that magically, by invoking certain names, feels like magic, right? You throw around some symbols like it's magic, a magic spell. You invoke names like the American pantheon, Jefferson and George Washington. You invoke names, you invoke formulas. You sing an anthem like it's like in church, like it's a magic incantation. But people sometimes don't even know what the actual substance is. Or how do we move forward? How do we improve things? It's like, yeah, every group now uses these cult techniques. Every group out there, even the libertarians, it doesn't matter what it is, or some new group like the Luxmaxers or the Groypers or whatever. Everything's the same. Everything's the same, and everything has a hidden structure behind it. Just like the AfD in Germany, just like the communists. There's people that were leftist activists for years, or sometimes decades. They said, I started when I was young. I had the long hair, and I was handing out the leaflets. I was bullhorning. I was getting in trouble in university. I was getting arrested by the cops at demonstrations. I got tear gas and blah, blah, blah. And I worked my butt off for the leftist cause. But I never got promoted to management. I never got, the salary that some of the others got. Why did why did some of my companions from back then, why are they now wearing suits and have like this influence in the leftist movement? And I got just my regular old job, and now I'm getting old, and somehow this didn't really work out for me. Why does somebody get promoted? Because there's a secret structure. Because there's a structure behind the visible structure. And the secret structure, that's pure espionage. That's pure Soviet-style espionage. They can assess whom they already have under their influence, and then they pick the most interesting candidates, and they give them tests. They give them loyalty tests, just like the KGB would do. They would sometimes approach them posing as the FBI or posing as the police and say, "Oh, we caught you with something. If you give up your secrets and you give up your friends, your comrades, then we'll get you off the hook. Or they would offer them money. You know, hey, we want to buy a membership list of your group, or you buy information about your group. We'll give you money so they can do these loyalty tests and give them training operations. You know, give them tasks, and when they perform, when they stay loyal, then they get promoted by the secret structure. And then they get promoted by the visible structure. But nobody's ever supposed to understand the invisible hidden structure behind that. And that goes for the right wing, or this crazy new right wing, or anything that you see. Sometimes these people know that they tell lies. You know, sometimes people know that protocols are fake and the Rothschild stuff is fake, and you know, but they think they need that because they think that
Hitler I think it was 1935, somebody came to Hitler to show the proof that the protocols were forgeries. And Hitler listened, he heard it, he said, well, it doesn't matter because it's true in principle.
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Can you imagine that? Hitler was shown the proof that this was nonsense, and he said, well, it doesn't matter that this is fake. It's just a fake that's supporting the ultimate truth.
Yeah, because of the
Because
Rothschild legends.
it's a belief system. It's not a rational, it's a contagion of the mind. It's a mind virus. It has nothing to do with reality. And these dysfunctional personalities, these dishonest people, these disordered personalities like Hitler, I think it was Carl Jung had evaluated him as a hysteric, a cluster B personality, probably a narcissist. Probably, I mean, you say there's that interesting book about Hitler being a homosexual, right? The Secret Hitler. Am I remembering the
Lothar
title right?
Machtan's book.
Machtan's book. Yeah, I've read it. I've been rereading it. It really was very persuasive when I first read it. When it came out 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago now. He's gathered a lot of detail, and
Yeah.
there's strange things there. But you've got these abnormal personalities that these are identity disorders, cluster B personalities, weak egos that need to be bolstered in various ways. And they go immediately for these conspiracy theories, which are part of mass formation themselves. They claim to explain everything as a conspiracy, in a way, socialism itself is saying that it's the conspiracy of the elites, of the wealthy against, it's the 1% against the 99%, or whatever, 2% against the 98%, whatever it is, whatever breakdown you want to give it. And that's really not how history works. There's always people who have more, who are in charge, who are responsible, and the only question is, are those people good people? Doesn't matter who's in charge. You can't have an equal society where everybody decides. That doesn't work. You have to have bosses and workers. You have to have leaders and followers. And of course, most people are actually they're made like sheep. They're constituted to follow. They don't have high education. The average IQ is 100. Half of the population is below 100 IQ by definition, right? You want somebody with a 98 IQ being your leader? You want Marjorie, then you want Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? I mean, the truth is you want the smarter people because all people should be regarded as equal spiritually and under the law and in God's eyes, but in terms of abilities, in terms of, it's just like Hesiod divided mankind into those who can think and lead, those who can recognize those who can think and lead and will follow them, and those who can't think, can't lead, and will recognize those who will. The useless men, as Hesiod called them. And this has always been the problem of having the right leaders and having people who aren't cooperative, the lumpen proletariat, the criminal class. That's the real Bolshevik revolution is these misfits. Having them somehow a way to control them so they don't disorder society. And now that we've been so lax and we've been so stupid and we've believed in this egalitarianism and this quote unquote democracy, whatever that means, we have disorganized ourselves. And we've set ourselves up for all kinds of failures and crises that are now unfolding in our midst.
Yeah.
Because Donald Trump, as Anthony Scaramucci told Vlad Vexler, he's lazy. He doesn't study anything. He doesn't listen to people. You can't tell him when he doesn't know something. You can't tell him what the reality is because he'll freak out. You know, Scaramucci worked with Trump. This is what he learned. You just can't tell him anything. I mean, is this a leader? Is this somebody you
Yeah,
want
and people, I mean,
in a considered position as president?
yeah, and the allure of a political cult has a lot to do with loyalty, because most people are loyalty starved. They don't experience a lot of loyalty because problematic family situation or bad marriage or the job. It's just an exchange of money and performing work. Or you just have a very strenuous relationship with the government or the IRS or whatever. It's just everybody wants something from you. You know, the government wants money. The corporations want to sell you something, and people that you meet in your life, work colleagues, sometimes in these corporations, oftentimes workers don't trust each other because they want to get promoted over the other guy, or they just don't want to share anything personal because it might be used against them. Or it's like people experience a lack of loyalty. They're starved. And then through the movies, especially, they've been shown unrealistic levels of loyalty. It's almost like an explicit adult movie. Everything's exaggerated. So in like Star Wars or Matrix or all these big fantasy films, they were so successful. Or James Cameron's movie, he was a big socialist, an eco-socialist. It's almost like there's this extreme loyalty between the characters that are part of this rebellion. You know, they would die for each other. They would. They are so close. They're brothers and sisters. They trust each other. They adore each other. And it's like what people have been dreaming about. You know, they look at that on the screen and they say, "Man, this is exactly what I want. I want this structure, this network that has this loyalty, and has that status. And if I'm loyal to this group, then the group will be loyal to me. This is everybody's dream because this is kind of how we're wired." Coming out of, tribal societies tens of thousands of years ago. But this is how the cult then advertises. We're the rebellion, or the truthers, or the groypers. We're the group. We are what you've been looking for. We give you what you want. You can get this loyalty and your brothers and sisters and the benefits of being in a group. They may even love bomb you when you join. This is what the left has been doing, or with the Woodstock hippie thing and the psychedelics, and let's go out in nature, take some drug that somebody cobbled together in his home lab, or that was bought off the black market, and let's just have this extreme experience in nature. And that's then interpreted as, we're the rebels, we're against the system, we're against this reality that we don't like. And so you're getting love bombed or attention bombed, and you feel this excitement that you've never really felt before. This is what the cult is really selling. But once you're in the cult, the leadership demands loyalty, and it doesn't really give any real loyalty back. The moment you become an issue, the moment you become a problem, they ditch you, or they just use you, and you get nothing back but some warm words, and that's it, right? This is, the Nazis. The Nazis, they made a big deal out of that in their marketing. But at the end, anybody who was more powerful in the Nazi era, they were all going against each other. This is what Lothar Machtan even describes in his book. Everybody was collecting compromat on everybody else. You had the Röhm Putsch, so a bunch of people got killed in the leadership. They were always going after each other. Everybody had something on everybody. So people started mysteriously dying. People were fearing getting assassinated by competitors. Bormann hated people. People hated Bormann. They didn't trust each other. And Albert Speer, in his biography, he describes this weird this weird scenario where you had to be physically close to Hitler to have any status, and if you fell out of that group, this could be the end of you. Is this the brotherhood? Is this the loyalty that people had been promised? Or, oh, you are a child now. You are a child of 8 years or whatever, 10 years. Now we force you, or basically force you, to be part of this youth organization from the government, and you have to follow orders. And what you get in return, well, some food and a bed, or a tent, camping tent. That's what you get. And some warm words and some nice parades sporadically. And then it's like, okay, now it's this next organization you have to join. Then it's compulsory service this and compulsory service that, and on and on and on and on and on. And you never get out of this if you can't physically escape the system. And this is what characterizes socialism as well. I mean, this was legendary in Soviet East Germany when everybody knew you couldn't trust anybody. I mean, anybody could be a spy. Anybody could be an informant. Anybody wanted to get ahead. Everybody wanted to get the better job and the better position, and they were all competing against each other. This was a horrendous way to live, but everybody had to pretend. Everybody had to publicly pretend we're this brother and sisterhood. We love each other, and we have the better system. And we're cheering on the system. And then you go home and you just, you don't like your life, but you can't say anything. You can't say that to anybody, pretty much, unless, maybe some rare exceptions. But if you tell anybody, you get reported. And that's the end of you. Or that's, the end of any acceptable life for you. This is what a cult feels like. And
yeah,
that's how it's done.
Well, it looks like we have covered our bases today. Do you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, I think the point, the underlying point, came across in this episode, that everything you see on the web, everything follows those patterns. Everything follows those mechanisms. It's all funded by somewhere, and there's a hidden structure behind it. And
they promote what's viral. They do the studies. Yeah, they had this thing where this group in the UK was studying people. They're gathering your data, what it is that the clickbait that you go for, and they know what people have a taste for, and they can feed that taste, and they can twist that taste, and they can feed you with things that are really poisonous.
Yeah, it's like any group you see, any trend, anything big, anything that's got money behind it.
And it's billions of dollars that you see this with the Ford, and the Ford Foundation isn't the only one pouring money into this.
Yeah, I mean, if there was a filter, if I could, maybe this even works. Maybe if you could go on X, formerly Twitter, and you say to this X AI, this Grok thing, you say, okay, Grok, filter out on my timeline, on different timelines that or the For You pages or whatever, filter out anything that's a waste of time, silly, or just snarkiness, or just insignificant, just shady people accusing other shady people. Filter out all that stuff. Just leave the relevant stuff that has an interesting thought or is original, hasn't been copied 1,000 times over, is an original post, maybe links to an article or links to a study or promotes some interesting book for you to read. the feed would almost be empty. If I say filter out garbage, there's nothing left.
Yeah.
There's nothing. There's
Yeah, it
almost
is. It's
nothing
true.
left.
It's a sea of garbage. Yeah. And you see it in entertainment. It's very much true when you look at all the different shows you can stream, the themes, the way it is. There's very few things that are really good and worthwhile. And it takes a sort of, if you know the classics, if you know what really good literature is, or you know what something thoughtful is, that's good. But a lot of it is just a part of this formula to bend your mind to the will of these movements.
Yeah,
You know,
and it's people, even people you talk to, they repeat what they saw online. If there was a real life filter, I can filter out anything that, people. I don't want to listen to people repeating that from Twitter or repeating that from
because
another
they
platform.
themselves are in the grip of the mind virus. It's this.
Yeah.
It's this
If I could
candy.
filter,
People just love the candy.
if I could
Yeah.
filter out that copy and paste stuff that people say in person in real life, it would be silence. It would be me being deaf.
Yeah.
There's
Well,
nothing
silence
left.
might be nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you folks for listening. This is Jeff Nyquist. This has been another edition of Friends and Enemies with my co-host Alex Benesch. I'm in the U.S., he's in Germany. Thanks for joining us and have a good week. Hope to see you next week.